President-elect. Hi, President-elect.
Hi. Hey, you.
I can't complain. Life is just wonderful.
Good. It should always be that way.
It's just simply wonderful. I'm trying to keep up with everything. That's what I was telling Ty, don't be upset with me.
So why don't we get started to so that we can honor the people who came. So
okay. Good afternoon, school counselors. This is yours truly, Dr. Reed Barnett, your professional development chair. I'm so happy to be here this evening. I will be on Zoom for a couple of minutes because in addition to being the professional chair, I'm also working. Anyway, two guys walk into a school, one black, one white. Field note.
Oh, I'm sorry. Your screen.
Thank you.
What's going on here?
I just want to welcome each and every one of you. For those of you who was at the last presentation with Dr. Cook and Jay, he is now doing part 2. And part 2 is field notes from the front line of anti-racist school counseling and education, part 2, strategies and initiatives. Today at 4 o'clock. So I'd like to welcome you again to this wonderful, wonderful presentation. I've met Dr. Cook and Jay. Dr. Cook is also part of ASCA. And we also have been working on various position papers for ASCA. So without further ado, Ty, take it away.
All right. Can everyone hear me okay? Good. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get going. Okay, do I have that? I do. Here we go. Well, Dr. Rotunda, I think.
Thought I made you co-host.
Yes. And while we get the technology squared away, let me say thank you to Dr. Reed Barnett, to Dr. Rotunda for inviting us back. I'm not sure who all had an opportunity to attend our session almost a year ago to the month. It was in spring of 2021. And Dr. Reed Barnett said, would you guys be willing to come back and finish up some of the information that you shared? And of course, I was more than happy to. So I'm glad that we were able to make our way back into your presence. And hopefully that's something that we share will be of benefit to you as you all are doing the good work. And it is good work, doing the good work of serving our kids and their parents, right? Also serving our educational colleagues and teachers and administrators. We're there for everyone. We all know the role of a school counselor and how it can sometimes expand even beyond the scope that we intend for it, but we're typically there. And so thank you all for allowing us to come back. In the vein of sharing, Dr. Wamstead, Jay, he's going to be running a little bit late. We're still struggling with COVID and absences in our schools. And so he's having to cover for some of his colleagues at his current school right now, and he won't be able to get free for another few minutes or so. So I apologize for that, but he did give me the green light to go ahead. So I'm going to do just that. And as I go ahead, I will share my screen here. I think I got it. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
All right. And then I will slideshow here. Oh. All right, here we go. So one of the first things I want to do again is thank you all for having me back again. And that is to just discuss, if you were with us last spring, we shared a pretty good bit of information about how our unlikely pairing came to be. So what I want to do is for the first 5 or 10 minutes or so, is just do a real quick rehash for those of you who may not have been here last spring, a year ago almost, right? And so real quick, the objectives are the same objectives, except this time we will focus on objective number 3 primarily, and that is to identify strategies for being able to work in meaningful ways across race and culture and addressing issues of race within education. Basically, in engaging in anti-racism work. That is our purpose. Jay is currently completing or in the midst of completing a book specifically for white educators and what they can do on the front lines of anti-racist education. I myself am still engaged in the work as a counselor educator and training school counselors and infusing these tenets of anti-racist practices within the curriculum that I'm using to train the next generation of school counselors. All right. And so what we want to do is share again some of the things that we have come across in our experiences and some of the things that we have discussed just in I like to call them creation sessions, right? Because we're very different individuals. And again, so real quick, this is Jay and I, and we met via Twitter. I think if you all remember us sharing, you know, I'm a hard type A. I'm a former military sergeant, and so I bring about change, or my approach is more to be a hammer, right? And it is to pound things into the way that I feel like and that our profession says that we should be doing. Jay is a little bit different. You know, he's a musician. He's a writer. He's a very natural writer. And he has a different perspective. And so bringing both of our perspectives together, we're both learning from one another. I'm definitely learning from him on how to refine my approaches. And he's learning from me about when it's time to bring out the sledgehammer and when it's time and how to channel the passions that he has as well with regards to this, right? But we came together and we've been collaborating now for about 2 years, where we started back in 2020. And here we are. We're here presenting this content, sharing our experiences and some of our work with you all in hopes that it helps you to benefit those students who you're serving. So remember, again, we wanted to highlight some of the key terms real quick. Racism and systemic racism. We are going with we operationally define, we use the operational definition for racism as being racial prejudice and bias times institutional power, right? Then we talk about institutional or structural racism as including those practices and policies, cultural representations, and yes, societal norms that are based in whiteness. And I could do an entire workshop on what whiteness entails. I know sometimes using demographic monikers make some people uncomfortable. That's not what we're referring to here when we refer to whiteness. When we're referring to whiteness here, we're referring to the totality of culture, of race, of societal norms, and how those things have been normed based on the numerical majority of those in our country since the country's founding, okay? But those norms that work to perpetuate racial group inequity, and that's what we're referring to there, all right? So keep those definitions in mind, keep the side notes, because we're going to come across these words again as we start talking about some of the strategies that we have taken on in doing the work. Secondly, as a real quick refresher, want to talk about what anti-racist entails, or what we're referring to when we discuss anti-racism. And we pulled from Kendi's book that he published a couple of years ago. However, I do want to note Kendi is, anti-racism work is not new. In my research, what I found is that anti-racism work dates back to the late 70s. And so, but in keeping, in practice with the most current ways of informing practice, we use some of the most recent literature to inform what we're doing. And I like Kendi's definition because it's simple, and B, it is directly connected to some of the work that was being done back in the 1970s, okay? But an anti-racist is someone who supports an anti-racist policy, through their actions and through their expressions or the ideas that they express within the systems that they work, okay? A few things to make note of. To be anti-racist is to be actively working against racist structures that weave throughout our society. Some people say, well, over the past year, there was a debate, in the political realm about whether or not the United States is a racist country and those sorts of things. We're not getting into that debate, but we are talking about some of the institutions of our country where the research has emphatically shown that there are disparities based on race, and that our race caused disparities as well. And so because of that, we can apply that moniker to some of those institutions and systems that we work within, such as our economic system, such as our justice system, and even on down into our educational systems, right? When we start looking at disparities in achievement, disparities in access, disparities in discipline, all based on or all including racial factors, I think the moniker fits, and that's what we're referring to there, okay? Also, if racism involves an element of power and prejudice, then as educators, we can't claim to be non-racist, right? Because as educators, we're part of those elements of power. And if we're retaining or unaware of the biases and the prejudices that we have, we actually can facilitate those racist systems. Yeah. And there is nowhere, well, I take that back. The justice system, I think people really need to be in tune with it. And of course, in education, we absolutely must be in tune with this notion of the power that we have as educators, and how if that power is combined with the biases and the prejudices that we have, that we are aware of and unaware of, then there could be adverse impacts on those students to who we are, bent on serving, who we claim we want to serve, all right? So there's no neutral ground. And some people have problems with that. So they don't like the sort of black and white. They like some of the gray area. And, what you'll find here, let me share this real quick. What you'll find is that even in my scholarly, quote unquote, presentations, which is what we're attempting to do here, I cannot separate my experiences as a Black man born and raised in Alabama who's lived in the Midwest and the South all of his life from the content that I'm sharing here, right? And so because I am unable to separate the two, then what you all will get from me is a pretty good dose of authenticity, if that makes sense. And I hope that in doing so, that it leads you to turn inward, to look inward, so that you can move towards that level of authenticity that will absolutely be needed in doing this work, right? So we'll get to some of those things, some of those characteristics, some of those traits that you can take on, that you will probably need and that you must have in navigating some of these systems, all right? All right, so keep in mind that if racism is the flow that we have, then we have to fight uphill by being anti-racist, which means that in our daily activities, we have to make sure that we're cognizant of our efforts or cognizant of the systems in which we work, and how sometimes those systems, we're not here to continuously castigate, but we are here to acknowledge and identify areas that need improvement so that our students can be the beneficiaries of a world-class education, so that they can develop in the way that God's intended them to develop, both academically, socially, and personally, or emotionally, excuse me. And then, of course, within their career development as well. All right. So with those being said, the conditions of an anti-racist, I'll take real quick questions. Real quick, any quick questions as I sort of reviewed how Jay and I got here, or on the terminology that we're using now. All right. And forgive me. Oh,
you
sorry,
can either
unmute.
And there's not a million people on the meeting. You can either unmute and just speak out, or chat, put it in the chat.
Okay, thank you. If you don't have a question, please right now, and if you come up with one later on, please feel free to raise your hand, or to, as Dr. Rotunda shared, to place it in the chat, and we'll go forward from there. Okay. I see someone's raised their hand. What is it, Dominic Marino?
Yes. Hi.
Yes.
I actually tried discussing. I'm a student intern right now, going through my major, or my graduate school, I should say. And I tried discussing the topic of racism with my supervisor, but when I did, she got very defensive. She felt that we are a diverse community, and I would say that's true. I work in a population with a good mix of white, Black, and Latinx students. But she felt that racism is just, we're not racist. We just do not discriminate against our kids. That's the beginning and end of the conversation. And for one of my assignments, I was trying to investigate what populations in our school are underrepresented and may not be receiving as many services as they may require. That's not to say that I'm criticizing the school. It's just a reality of what we do. But again, it's met with real resistance. So what would you say if your administration or fellow educators are resistant to even discussing the topic?
Dominic, thank you for that question. What would I say if my colleagues, administration, even my fellow school counselors, are resistant to even discussing the topic of racism, right? Well, what I would say is, or the advice that I would give is to engage in pulling the numbers, the data, right? And my job sometimes is, I used to think my job was to convince people of this and this. And what I found is that people have to really convince themselves, right? And there's no manner of harping or preaching or lecturing that I can do that's going to change someone's mind who is resolute in their current stance. But what I can do, and unfortunately over the last 5 years or so, this has even been challenged. What I can do is uncover the facts. I can uncover the data that shows some of those disparities that are there, that can be and oftentimes are striated by race. Okay, so that's number one. And I typically will lead in with using the numbers. Here's a case in point. The last school that I worked in here in the state of Georgia, I was at a high school in 2020, and had a lot of students coming to me, and was able to foster the type of relationship with students where they felt free to share some of their struggles. And the students really felt like they were not getting a fair shot, and they felt like it was because of their race, right? Not that teachers were actively discriminating against, but that the blind spots that some of the educators had led to these students feeling a certain way. one of the things that I knew that I was, as a new person at the school, I could actually validate that because I had some similar experiences as those students with some of the educators in the building. Keep in mind that this was a school that over the period of 8 years went from 90% white student population to 80% African-American student population and 15% student populations from, Asian, Hispanic, and even international students. While the staff was 95% white, and even when the student demographic flipped, was still 90% white. So here we have a demographic shift in a pretty rapid point of, a pretty quick turnaround. And what's happened was the educators hadn't kept up with being able to work with those students in a way that led students to believe that they were being cared for, because that's what it eventually boiled down to. And so what I did was, I conducted surveys from parents and from students, and I got good qualitative data. I pulled some of the quantitative data, the discipline data, and it all showed a clear picture. And so what I did was I took it to my administrator and say, listen, this is what I'd like to do to address these things that I've been able to uncover at this school. The principal was new as well. And as a result, I was then able to go in and to provide a quick workshop in a staff meeting. Of course, I got a very icy reception during that staff meeting, but I'm one of those type people who is more motivated by the ice than I am deflated by the ice. So what I would say is choose and pick your times wisely, but definitely lead with the data, lead with the research. Yeah, mm-hmm. I hope that helps.
It does. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I see another hand raised. Bill?
Yeah, hi. I'm Bill Havranek. I work at Weebatuck High School. I'm an educator there. I teach high school social studies, and I address racism almost on a daily basis through my curriculum. Mm-hmm. And address issues with microaggressions. And the reason why white folks tend to get defensive is because they think it's an attack on them in the sense that they're saying, oh, well, I'm not racist. Well, that's not what it's about. It's about looking at yourself and your own assumptions that you have that may be ingrained that you don't know.
Uh-oh, did we lose him?
He got iced.
Oh, yeah, I think he froze. Bill, I'm not sure if you can hear us.
160 students and in the high school. And so about 15 of those are, African-American, and that's about 5%. So what's interesting about that is that we, our administrative staff got a note or a letter from the state saying that we had suspended too many white kids who were with special needs background. Mm-hmm. So then we had a restorative justice program that we were forced to kind of implement district-wide in order to comply with the state. So the irony is that we were labeled discriminating against white people when that's the majority of the people who are the demographics in the school. Mm-hmm. So it's a little strange because the reality versus what's happening and what the state does is two different things. I've been a teacher for 19 years now at this district, and I find it difficult sometimes to really fully explain the extent of how racism is blind to most Caucasians, because when they tell a story, well, I was on the street corner with my friend, and if they don't say their friend was black, the other person automatically assumes it's a white person if it's two white people talking to each other.
Right.
So they don't understand that there is a real thing called white privilege, but when you bring that word up, people get very defensive because they are thinking they're being attacked in some way, and that's not the point at all. So it's hard to convey experience with it too, being a white male myself, in the sense of, I've seen injustice. I've had friends who've experienced injustice. I experienced it in my own way when I was younger, but I can't pretend to claim that I have any real experience with it because I'm a white male in America. Like, only so much I can say. So I always preface it that way when I get into that, and we do some readings and we look at some facts and data, and I explain to them what micro expressions are. And so a lot of times they just, adults can't even understand what it means, let alone, our students. So again, you have to be careful.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, Bill. Your approach of educating, your approach of getting in the weeds to disaggregate the data so that it can be explained in a way that hopefully people will, quote unquote, get. Understanding too that while we're talking about anti-racism, that we also live in a country where students who have students with disabilities have disproportionate in a lot of areas as well, and also students from low SES backgrounds. I'm from the South, and there are a lot of students in rural Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi who aren't receiving some of the things that they need to receive. So I appreciate you highlighting the scope of it and how we have to go the extra mile to educate, and that's what it boils down to. So thank you all for those questions. I see Dr. Wamstead, Jay is here. He's made it. So we're going to keep right on. I see where time is moving right ahead. So Jay, where we are now, we've just completed a real quick review of some of the important terminology about how our pairing came to be. We've talked about anti-racist or being an anti-racist and the conditions of it. I was going to share a little bit of, quick review of some of our challenges that we shared last year, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because I think those will come out as we delve into the strategies and initiatives that you and I have had an opportunity to engage in, okay? So what I want to do is pick up here, right? What has gone on since the last time we met, New York? Keep in mind that we're almost a year to the month, and there's been quite a bit that has gone on, right? I call them the CRT Chronicles, right? So the critical race theory chronicles have taken off. And what does that involve? Well, I'm going to call, excuse me, I'm from the South. And again, I told you all, you get the authentic me, but I'm going to call a spade, right? And the CRT Chronicles basically include, it's become the catch-all word to ban or to reduce the integration of topics of race, justice, oppression, and privilege within our educational spaces, all right? It's been a catch-all word to ban books, a la Texas, and aspects of history that make certain demographics of people uncomfortable. In the state of Tennessee, they wanted to ban the book, about the integration of the New Orleans schools. I can't think of the name of the group, and I'm not going to get into the names, but they're banning aspects of history because the notion is that if those aspects of history make us uncomfortable and it's talking about race, then it must be categorized under critical race theory. And then there's this notion that we are indoctrinating students in the K through 12 environment from a critical race theory lens. And y'all, this is really real. In Indiana right now, there's legislation that's being proposed, if not voted on, under the guise of parental rights that will reduce a student's ability to access school counseling services. In my home state, yes, my home state of Alabama, they just proposed legislation to ban the American School Counseling Association's national model. Because if you're familiar with the model, it includes words like justice. School counselors are social justice advocates. School counselors work to bring about equity in light of uncovering disparities based on race within their school systems. And so the state wants to now ban that model. That's what's been going on. But guess what else has been going on? Yours truly and Jay have still been working hard. All right. So as we transition and talk about these strategies, Jay, is there anything, I want to get you in, man. Is there anything you'd like to share before we jump into, or actually this is a great transition to some of your work, some of the things that you've been doing well. Oh, excuse me, I didn't mean to do that. But I'd like to give you the opportunity to jump in real quick about where we are currently, 1 year ago from when we started this conversation with New York.
Yeah. First off, hey, y'all, and I am really sorry to be late. So I work in a real life middle school, and you might hear the announcements as they're dismissing people from the bus. But on Tuesday, I secured permission to skip bus dismissal and be here with you at 4. And today we had 3 teachers phone in for various reasons. 3 8th grade teachers out of 15 of us all had to leave. So they politely told me, you cannot miss bus dismissal. So anyway, that's just the real chronicles of a real teacher. And I'm still sitting in my classroom. But I am so apologizing for being late, but I'm really glad to be here with you. And yeah, it's just in terms of, and I want Ty to get a chance to go to the strategies, but the space that we entered into late last spring, after some of the verdicts came down, and into the summer about the CRT thing. And I know it was brewing, and maybe some people smarter than me saw it coming. But when it first dropped, it just felt like it was I remember the initial response just being, oh, the CRT is just a college subject. This is overblown. And I think people on the know were saying, no, they don't, hold on, we're about to, there we go. That's my principal. I'll just mute for a second, Ty, and you take it.
You're good. I'm sorry, you all. So, hey, listen, at least you all know we are literally at the grassroots level doing this work. And there's no other moniker for that than hearing the announcements at the end of the day there. So as Jay transitions from bus duty, we'll move right on into strategies, and I'll have him to pick up in just a second, because he's going to speak to some of his writings that have been published here in our local area, in the Atlanta metro area, but also nationally as well. But before we get to that, I want to highlight the strategies for anti-racism work or anti-racist practices. They all center on multicultural competence. Yes, it goes nowhere. The course that you took, you may have taken 2 if you were lucky in your master's level program on multicultural counseling, is still very relevant. Okay, you cannot do anti-racist school counseling work if you're not continuously growing as a culturally competent practitioner. So what are those 3 areas that we're talking about? Increasing one's cultural awareness, integrating cultural humility into our cultural awareness, and we'll talk about these in a sec. Of course, continuing to increase our cultural knowledge, and then building and integrating culturally relevant skills in the work that we do. Okay? These are central in being a culturally competent teacher, and being a culturally competent administrator, and being a culturally competent school counselor. All right. So with that being said, let's talk about increasing cultural knowledge and awareness. And I think a good place to start is addressing the challenges that we face. And Jay addressed some of these challenges in one of his opinion pieces that he wrote for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, right? And so, Jay, I want to give you the opportunity to speak to some of the things that you were actually mentioning with regards to critical race theory, and how we don't have to necessarily run from it, because it speaks to some of the work that we do, even though none of us are actually teaching the theory in the work that we're doing. Okay.
Yeah, and that's the work. And so I'll just go right back to where I was when my esteemed principal, Dr. Havis, interrupted us with her actual job, that the response to the CRT scare started with, well, we don't teach CRT. College students teach CRT, and not even them, mostly not. I mean, you're mostly not going to get this except in graduate school, blah, blah, blah. And that was kind of my kind of de facto conversational starter over the summer, how I was tweeting, how I was talking. I wasn't even bothering to write about it because it didn't seem relevant. But as the argument took shape over the summer, as it turned into, I think Ty used as kind of a catch-all boogeyman for all expressions of just as a culture war boogeyman, it became clear that like that wasn't an adequate response. It was inadequate to just say, oh, we don't teach CRT. And then it just felt to me that no, we need CRT. I felt that from the beginning, but it wasn't until the end of the summer when the school year started to go, and my own district banned explicitly the teaching of CRT, which is where I work, the people that pay me, was such a nonsense move because we're a K through 12 district. There's not a single person in this entire district, and we're the 25th largest in the country, that is going to teach CRT this year. But they went through the trouble at the school board meeting to ban it, only just for the message it would send to the minority of white parents at this district. We're a majority Black and brown district. But they wanted to send a message to the white parents that they weren't going to tolerate it. Anyway, in this AJC piece, this Atlanta Journal-Constitution piece, I made an argument that we do not teach CRT, but we need to be CRT teachers. And I walked through the 6 tenets of critical race theory as conveyed in the school of in the education world. So Dixon and Rousseau took the legal theory of CRT, and in 2006, kind of fleshed out what it meant in the education world. And I took through those tenets and talked about what they meant for white teachers. And my argument, and this has been my argument since then, this was back in September when this piece was published, or maybe August. My argument since then has been that we do need CRT because it changes us. I don't have to say the word CRT. I don't say it. My kids wouldn't know what I meant if I said it. I'm not teaching CRT, but I am a teacher who is informed by CRT. And that has radically changed me. And that's the important thing. We need to change white teachers. And I'll hit pause for a second, Ty.
Well, I think you hit pause, but you hit it on the right point, and that it changes you. So if you don't mind, Jay, could you speak to some of the personal work that you've had to engage in while also having a broad knowledge base of things like critical race theory, anti-racism work, multiculturalism? What does that look like for you on the personal end that inevitably impacts you as a professional, as a teacher of 8th grade students?
Yeah. So my classroom is, my school is majority Black. And then there's a second high minority of Hispanic students. And then there's about 10% of white students. There's a few actual Indians, like continental Indians, subcontinental Indians, I guess would be the way to say that. But mostly it's Black and brown with a few white kids. And it is a particular challenge. My classes are almost all Black with a couple of Hispanic faces and then a couple of white faces. And in the charged space like we live in, we're just a couple miles from the city limits of Atlanta here, and we're in a very, very racialized part of Atlanta. We're in Newt Gingrich's old district, if that name means anything to you. That's where we reside. And we used to be majority white, the town and district, and we're not anymore. And especially that's true in our little South County area where we are. So anyway, that's such a huge question. What to do about that? I think the first thing that needs to be done is and I missed the name of the gentleman that was talking when I first came in. You were discussing, somebody else was on the camera, and he was I
think it was Dominic.
Okay, we'll just say Dominic, and if it's not, I'm sorry. But
no, I think you were talking about Bill.
Okay.
Bill was saying something before.
Yeah, no, it's not that picture of Dominic. It was somebody on the live. Anyway, he was talking about the difficulty at least what I understood him to say, because again, I came in the middle of his talking, was the difficulty of making white people to even think that any of this matters. And that is a journey that I've been on, both myself personally as somebody that like did not think any of this mattered 30 years ago when I was in high school. Is that right? Still, yes, I was in high school 30 years ago. And I did not think race mattered. And I have gone on, that journey myself, like learning and convincing myself, but then I've engaged in countless conversations, just like the gentleman was talking about, with other white people to varying degrees who are, open to the idea of talking about it, to completely resistant, but in an entirely oblivious way, to actually racist, although those conversations don't last long. But the vast majority of them are just people that like are kind of interested but aren't actually willing to like follow up their interests with any reading or thinking or conversation. And that is, so to loop back to the school building, like that's the problem when we're looking at a space like mine. And like I'm in a middle school, and like many middle schools, we're a majority, most of our employees are white females. And that's just true like nationwide as a teaching corps. But it's certainly more true in the middle school than a high school, for instance. There's a couple, anyway, but we're constantly like moving, like the teacher turnover is just such a like deal, right? So like you get new white people in the building and you want to talk to them and you try to build a coalition, and then that's like they leave the district, fall apart, et cetera, leave the school. So I am looped off a little bit of like answering your question about how to do work, or what work I've done. And I'll come back to it if you want, but I will pause here at like, I just think the most important thing that a white person can do once they have some knowledge and passion is to talk to other white people in one-on-one conversations. And that is really not easy because most white people aren't ready or willing. So I'll pause for a second, hand it back to you.
Well, I think that's, thank you for sharing that and for giving us aspects of your journey through your experiences. And I'd like to contrast what you shared in your journey, your experiences with my own. And you went back you took me back 30 years ago. So 30 years ago, I was in high school as well. And guess what? Race was top 3 topics amongst myself and my peers.
Sure.
Growing up in Southern Alabama. We were just engrossed by it, not in a negative way, but it was just something that was always there that we knew impacted us. We could feel it, but that and I was in a school that was, the African-American population was only about 35% of the school population. But we were there and we felt unseen, unheard, and we felt like no one understood. And so it was one of the things that actually led me to the field of counseling, because I'm like, well, maybe if I can appeal to people's better angels, maybe if I could somehow communicate empathy, then I'll have that empathy reciprocated to me as well in my own personal experiences. And then I'm not even going to start on the professional experiences or the experiences of the kids that I've worked with. Yeah.
Let me just interrupt and say, like, you could just be describing, like we could have gone to the same school, except mine was in South Georgia, where it was majority white. There was probably 25 to 35% black. And that was it. It was only white and black in South Georgia at that time. I had like one black friend, and that was it. And I did not see the rest of the black students. I didn't know any of them. They were unseen and unheard by me. And I was not like the most popular kid, but I was like I was a normal, regular high school kid that like had a lot of friends, and none of them were black except the one guy, right? And that kind of covered me. And I became a teacher for a very similar reason. I loved high school. I loved middle school. I loved high school. I loved college. I'm just like, well, I just want to stay here, right? And I think that's the journey of a lot of teachers. A lot of white teachers certainly is we love school and we just want to live there for the rest of our lives. And we don't know what it's like to be black at school, right? and to experience the discrimination with the discrimination present in grading practices and gifted programs and suspension rates and all that. So you and I had like opposite experiences at the same high school, even though they were in different South schools.
Absolutely, it sounds like it. So I thank you for sharing that piece as well, because what we're trying to communicate here is, and Dominique, your initial question sort of sparked this, because in doing anti-racist work, it does begin with being able to have difficult conversations, right? And so Jay has been working. He's writing a book. He's published here in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution on Edutopia, giving some guidelines for teachers. And yours truly has been busy as well. And as Dr. Reed Barnett highlighted, we worked together on ASCA's Position Statements Committee. Well, guess what, you all? Last year, this time, I was working with a gentleman by the name of Dr. Andre Castro, who is the Deputy Director of School Counseling Services for Los Angeles County Unified School District, something like that. But he's out in LA, and we wrote ASCA's Anti-Racist Practices for School Counselors position statement. And here's the statement. I wanted to provide it to you. And I felt like it was very timely to be able to do so, since we had an opportunity to come back. But school counselors work toward cultural competence. There's a cultural competence piece. And that's, you can hear my own iterations about the importance of cultural competence coming through, and engage in anti-racist actions by advocating to change racist policies, procedures, practices, guidelines, and laws contributing to inequities in students' academic, career, and social emotional development. So the operative words here are actions and advocacy. And for school counselors across this country, for educators across this country, if we are engaged in the work of anti-racism, if we're engaged in helping our students to develop into the people that they're meant to be, then we have to do what? We have to make a concerted effort to continue growing in our own cultural competence, which, as Jay has already highlighted, includes that personal piece, that personal awareness, but it also absolutely includes engaging in actions and advocating on behalf of and with our students. All right. And so what I want to do now is really sort of highlight a few aspects of the anti-racist practices domains that we came up with. And we broke them down, almost paired them with the different domains under cultural competence. There's the awareness piece, but we also added a reflection piece. And Dominic, I hope that your next conversation with your supervisor, of course you want to be nice because they are your supervisor, is one where you can hand them the ASCA position statement and highlight one of the very first components there, and that is that we reflect regularly on our cultural worldviews. Yeah. We reflect regularly on what we value, what we believe, on the assumptions that we make, which starts to get us over into some really uncomfortable stuff, because we all make assumptions about people based on what we know and don't know about them, based on how people look, based on where they're from, how much money they have, all sorts of things. And our biases that we all have as well, both implicit and explicit. And we seek to understand how these views can influence our work as either teachers, as in the case with Jay, or as school counselors, all right? So that reflective piece, it means we have to do the work ourselves. Yeah, you cannot engage in anti-racism work without starting with self, okay? Participating in those conversations, we call them courageous conversations, and it does take courage to engage in them. It took courage for Dominic, to really engage his counseling supervisor on the topic of racism, let alone someone who's just his peer, but he engaged his supervisor, which there is a power differential that can sometimes go the other way if you're not careful. I mean, we're keeping it real here, right? Because one of the reasons they're courageous conversations is because we talk about topics that our country as a whole still has a lot of discomfort talking about. Issues of justice, racism, privilege, and oppression, right? And so it starts there. Some other aspects I wanted to highlight real quick: the knowledge and skills piece, and then also the action and advocacy piece. And I alluded to this from my own experiences when I shared how I went about broaching this difficult topic with folks who did not want to hear about it. That staff that I worked with, that I shared the story of, they did not want to hear anything about anything having to do with culture. All right. And they tried to ice me out. And I took it as a challenge and was motivated by it. But we have to use data and report that data, not only to our administrators, but also to our community leaders and to our parents. Because once you get them behind you, that's some extra courage. That's that support that you're going to need as well. Okay. Recognizing and responding to incidents of racism. This is where the stuff is at the grassroots level, right? How often do we turn the blind eye or turn the deaf ear to those I'm sorry, the second gentleman who spoke of the microaggressions as we encounter them or observe them amongst students or even amongst our colleagues? How often are we silent? And so what an anti-racist is saying is, or engaging in anti-racist practices inherently mean is that we cannot remain silent, right? We cannot. And anyone who is looking for some motivation about that silence piece, I would encourage you to read Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail. Yeah, where he really calls out people who asked him to wait, to wait on, to ascribe to this incrementalism. He was not hearing it. And so I take on that same mentality within the work of a school counselor and in advocating for my students who are in the here and now, who I feel can benefit from the services that I've been trained to provide them, that research says they will benefit from. Okay, so there's those pieces. Jay, what do you think? We've already highlighted the personal reflection piece, the obtaining knowledge piece. What about the action and advocacy, Jay? What in your experiences, how have you engaged in the action and advocacy? And we're not going to count your writings because that is a form of advocacy in and of itself as well. But are there any other ways that you've been able to engage?
Well, first I want to loop back to that, just the phrase, reflect on feelings and sources of personal resistance that might arise. And that just, it's been kind of a little theme of today, at least I'm making it a theme in terms of like, what is the difficulty about talking to white people? And the phrase, a phrase that I like to use with people that popped up in my mind when you said that was that white people need to learn how to put themselves in the story of race and racism. And that just thinking about our very parallel experiences as high school students, and it was maddeningly easy for me for a decade to not have any notion that there was anything racialized about a deep South Georgia town in the 90s. But of course there was something racialized about it. There's something racialized about every town in America, but certainly about these towns down here, where literally they drew neighborhood lines and red lines and drew school districts out of race data very deliberately. And this notion of seeing ourselves in the story, I think, is really important. That it is not just like, oh yeah, there's systemic racism. There is. That's true, and there are like huge problems with the entire system and the history and how it's boiled down to today. But also, like, we as white people like bump up into that system and we benefit from it, and we coast through it, and we don't even know we're doing it, and we have got to, at least the phrase I use with my friends and people that I speak to, is we've got to put ourselves in the story. And one thing I've challenged people to do is, I think, at least in my limited anecdotal experience, is that almost every Black man that I've ever spoken to about this has a very startling story about a police interaction at some point or another in their life. I'm not gonna say it's 100% true because I don't remember every conversation I've ever had, but that feels like a consistent theme. Whereas most white men that I've talked to we have a funny story about a police interaction from our lives at some point. We have a thing we got away with, a thing that somebody let us go from, a stupid thing we did when we were between the ages of 16 and 29, and that we got off of, or one night we spent in jail and then we, got bailed out, went home and never heard about it again. And that putting yourself in the story, it's difficult to do, but to try, like, that's just something I challenge white men especially to do, is to, like, well, put yourself in the story of policing and race, and how has that gone for us as white men, and how does that typically go for Black men? I'm gonna jump back to you for just a second because I know you have something to say about that.
Well, I'll let that stand on its own. Actually, okay. I think he nailed it. My entire circle of friends, all of whom are successful by society standards of being successful. We all worked our asses off. Our parents supported us and told us, this is what you must do to be successful. And we thought that if we stayed on that path, that it would allow us to be immune from some of those negative experiences that you were referring to that others have had, because none of us have ever been in trouble with the law, so to speak. We've never been engaged in illegal activities and things like that, yet and still every single one of us has had a negative experience with police. So it goes back to what I was referring to earlier, Jay, in that as school counselors, we have got to appeal to be able to empathize with our white brothers and sisters, in hopes that that would be reciprocated to us once we start sharing some of our stories of how my 12th grade English teacher would not allow me to be governor in our mock state legislation course because she said there'd never been a Black governor, right? Those sorts of things. And
if we could loop back to the school building, because I just can't even, like, imagine. I have a tiny glimmer into what y'all are dealing with as school counselors. The stress of the past couple of years, just combined with, like, normally the normal stress of being a teenager, right? These children are just, like, they're having a hard time. Like, we're all having a hard time. Adults are having a hard time. And we get paid to be here, and so, like, the kids come up in here and they're having a hard time, and I kids go to the counselor all the time, and I just, like, I think, oh God, pray for that poor counselor as that kid is going there, because I know that that's, like, y'all doing such an important job between them and the discipline system, but the discipline system is a mess. And to go back to thinking about the police, I think we start that in the classroom with the way we kind of instantiate discipline here, and the way we give this phrase, boys will be boys, jumps into my head. And, like, we give that to white boys in general. The data says that we give it to white boys, but not Black boys. Let's just say that. This is not anecdote. This is just fact, is that Black boys are, disciplined more harshly at all levels and more disproportionately. And so the whether people say boys will be boys or not, like we don't let Black boys be Black boys. We start disciplining them early for boyish behavior. And God, these kids they're just kids. Like, they're bouncy and pushy and jumpy and touchy and, like, all the things that, like, I remember doing as a boy too. Like, just like, I turned my back, somebody popped somebody in the head, and then the slap fighting. I mean, like, and if a white teacher is not, to go back to, culturally competent enough to, like, not feel threatened by Black boys being boys. Let me say it this way: if the white teacher lacks the cultural competency to let Black boys be boys, like, they are going to just make enemies in the classroom, and they're going to put children on a negative road, which has academic consequences that are miserable, and then show up later in the data for Black children.
I'll say this. I say this quite often, Jay, to speak to that point, and we are out of time already. But I say this. I see it, Dr. Rotunda. You cannot serve or teach students who you're afraid of. And
right.
You must look inward to determine what is it about the Black kid that I'm afraid of, that I'm not afraid of if a white kid engages in the same behavior. Those are the pieces that we're talking about. So this first phase of engaging in the actions is to do the personal work. The second phase is back to what Dominique shared when he asked his question, and that is, Dominique, if your supervisor is not open to having these difficult discussions, find someone within the school building. I am praying that there is at least one person within the school building with whom you could collaborate and connect with, just like Jay and I have collaborated and connected via Twitter. There has to be someone, if not in your school, within your district. If not in your district, within your home. If not in your home, within your community or your church or whatever it is that you do. Find somebody. Okay? And then finally, third, you all, as we wrap up here, I'll leave it here, and that is, what can you do? You must speak up, even when it's difficult to do so. That takes courage. I am not telling you to go out there and to put your livelihood at risk. I like being able to keep a roof over my family's head and keeping my 2 twin boys fed. So what I'm saying is to be intentional, to be meticulous, and to pick and choose your battles, but at least do that is what I'm saying, okay? Secondly, stand up. Meaning, and the notion here is that you're engaged in some sort of action, and the action for school counselors is through advocacy. All of these are highlighted in the school counselor anti-racist practices position statement, and also with the American Counseling Association's advocacy competencies. Definitely review those, dust them off and review them. And then finally, let's get to it. Dr. King always talked about the fierce urgency of now. Y'all, with the legislation, with people who are convincing themselves that facts are in fact not facts, there is a fierce urgency of engaging in this work right now, like yesterday. There is no time to waste. And again, it is not because we're looking to be right. It's not about me. And you all know this because you all are counselors. It's not about us. It's about the kids. It's about the kids. And if we ever want to move this country further towards its high ideals, we've got to be able to help our next generation of people who will lead this country to have these conversations in substantive ways as opposed to in adversarial ways. Okay? Jay, I'll give you the last word. Dr. Rotunda, I apologize for the time.
Yeah, no, just that's the word right there. I mean, for me, I have 3 L's, and those 3 L's are learn, lament, and liberate. And learning has to, for a white person, kind of has to come first, because most of us don't come preloaded with this knowledge. Lament is what Ty and I were talking about a minute ago, about putting ourselves in the story, and then liberate is not liberating the children or saving the children, but liberating yourself to be a effective educator, counselor, to be somebody who can like walk equality, walk equity, I guess is a better way to put it. So I will hit pause, and I think we'll stay, right, Ty, if anyone wants to stop and talk.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Jay and I did it again. We're passionate about this work. And we can't help but jump at every opportunity to discuss it, especially with others who are like-minded as well. So hopefully something that we've shared will be of benefit to you. And yes, we will forward this PowerPoint. Thank you all again for having us.
I just want to say, I just love you guys to give yourself kudos, so I don't have to give you kudos. Again, this is Dr. Gail Reed Barnett. I am the Professional Development Chair for DISCA. Again, fantastic presentation. Jay, thank you so much for enlightening us. The 2 individuals who spoke about, was very eloquent in saying that, no, we are not saying that, if I can paraphrase, we're not saying that, you're racist when we're presenting this. What we're saying is to enlighten, to educate. And that's all we basically do, it is educating people about the inequities. If anyone, real quick, Bob, I thank my executive director, Bob, for also putting this together. But if anyone was watched the nomination questions regarding hopefully our future justice, and when those senators were questioning her, I couldn't figure out if I'm in the 60s or if I'm 60. And she handled it beautifully in terms of answering the questions. So it still remains that a lot of people need to be educated to understand what it is that we are trying to do as school counselors with all this valuable information.
Dr. Barnett, can you imagine if she had screamed and yelled like Justice Kavanaugh did? Like, can you imagine?
Oh, yeah.
She would be that angry Black woman.
She wouldn't have, they'd have walked her out of the building. I mean, like.
What's interesting is some of the questions that she got, and I heard this on TV. Some of the same questions she got were some of the same questions Thurgood Marshall got.
Thurgood Marshall.
Wow.
When he was in nominations in the hearings, and they played some old videos last night.
I didn't see that.
Yeah, from some of they were Southern senators at the time, and they were Democrats at the time. But there were some of the same questions. It was kind of like it was weird. Anyway.
And Gail, it was interesting how she kept such composure. And he cried like a baby. Just saying, just throwing it out there.
Just saying, yeah.
Just saying, exactly.
It's class is class, and that's how it is.
So Ty, we have some real quick. We got some work to do in Alabama. I don't know how we're going to do this.
Sure.
But we have some work to do in Alabama.
I think I'm going to shut the YouTube off now.
Oh, okay.
I think I remember how.
Again, thank you, Jay. Thank you, Ty. And we just have to keep fighting.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
And we also we have future webinars coming up. March 28th, we have CHAMP, Navigating Through the Standards. Dr. Dahir is on here. I saw her name, and she is doing a presentation, upcoming series for principals and school counselors, which will be presented on, I see the time.
I'm sorry. There's four different dates.
Oh, 4 different days. Okay.
427, 54, 511, 518. The CHAMP camp, that's Carolyn Stone's doing that one. So that's a real treat. If you haven't heard Carolyn Stone speak, she's amazing. She is the ethical expert.
Master guru.
And she's a great speaker.
Truly.
Yes.
And we got our conference is coming. We got a cool logo. So.
Comprehensive school counseling programs, helping students maximize their potential. November 17th through the 19th at the Hilton in Albany, which will be in November. So, save the date. We're looking forward to each and every one of you to attend.